over the Gaza Strip. And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Services say more than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed since the fighting began. According to Hamas Health Ministry, at least 3 strikes over several hours hit the courtyard and the obstetrics department of Shifa hospital, killing several and wounding others sheltering there. Chaotic scenes were seen outside the hospital as many were attempting to flee. Israel's military said that a misfired projectile launched by militant groups in Gaza had hit Shifa hospital. It further dismissed reports that said that the blast was caused by an Israeli airstrike. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization showed what Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital looked like prior to thousands of people who had been sheltering at the complex, fleeing the area after reports of strikes. In another attack by Israeli forces, 1 person was killed and 28 others were wounded in a shooting by Israeli forces at Al-Quds Hospital in Gaza. And medical teams in Gaza City's Al-Quds Hospital worked under torchlight to treat the patients. On the other hand, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited an army base at the border with Gaza. Netanyahu spoke with the soldiers and joined them for Sabbath service. He praised the soldiers for their job to the security of Israel. Evacuations from the Gaza Strip into Egypt for foreign passport holders and for Palestinians needing urgent medical treatment was suspended due to problems bringing medical evacuees to the Rafah border crossing from inside Gaza. And this comes as Israel's chief military spokesperson said that more than 100,000 residents of the Gaza Strip have fled southwards over the last 2 days as Israeli forces operate deep in the Gaza city.
הדבר הזה קורה בצורה מסודרת לאוכלוסייה שנמצאת בעזה באופן כזה שהוא לא רק שהוא לא מפריע ללחימה, הוא משפר את מצבנו, כי בסוף שירדו כבר למעלה מיותר מ-100,000 אנשים, רק ביומיים האחרונים יורדים דרומה, זה מאפשר לנו להילחם ולהתמקד במחבלים. החלק השני זה החלק ההומניטרי שמגיע ממצרים, בהובלה של מצרים וארצות הברית ומדינות מתונות אחרות בעולם הערבי שמכניסות אוכל, מכניסות תרופות, מסייעות באוהלים ובהקמת בתי חולים שדה, שבעתיד יאפשרו גם פינוי של בתי חולים אחרים שמהווים תשתית טרור, והדבר הזה קורה דרומית לנחל עזה, לאותה אוכלוסייה שזזה, ולכן שני המאמצים האלה ביחד מאפשרים לנו להילחם טוב יותר וממוקד יותר במחבלי חמאס.
The Israeli military released video, it says, showed airstrikes on a series of Hezbollah targets in Lebanese territory. And the attacks also included military positions where the group was believed to have been operating, a weapons warehouse and an intelligence site. As the war continues, the international community is also making efforts to ease the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza and initiate hostage release. Now, in an interview with BBC French President Emmanuel Macron, Macron said that while he recognizes Israel's right to protect itself, there was no justification for the bombing and saying a ceasefire would benefit Israel. On the other hand, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said the Palestinian Authority could play a role in administering the Gaza Strip on condition that there was a full political solution that also encompassed the occupied West Bank. Amnesty International Secretary has also called out the Western Bloc double standards when it comes to international conflicts that are a threat to human rights. The United States expressed growing concern about the rising Palestinian death toll in the Gaza Strip, where health officials said that the number killed in a 5-week-old Israeli bombardment had topped 11,000. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called for an end to the war in Gaza during an African-Saudi summit held in the kingdom's capital, Riyadh.
وندين ما يشهده قطاع غزة من اعتداء عسكري واستهداف المدنيين واستمرار انتهاكات سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلية للقانون الدولي الإنساني، لنؤكد ضرورة وقف هذه الحرب والتهجير القسري وتهيئة الظروف لعودة الاستقرار وتحقيق السلام في أفريقيا، وذلك عبر تدشين مشروعات وبرامج مائية في دول القارة بقيمة تتجاوز $1 مليار على مدى 10 سنوات.
In Israel, Tel Aviv, families and friends of Israeli hostages attended an event marking the start of the Jewish Sabbath. At the event, which was a large gathering held around a large empty table set for 200 some missing hostages, performers sang religious hymns while a few people stopped to light a candle and pray. Israel has meanwhile revised Hamas attack death toll to around 1,200.
Israel has confirmed that its soldiers are operating from near the Al-Shifa hospital, which is the biggest hospital in the Gaza Strip. In fact, thousands of people who had their homes bombed have taken refuge inside the premises of the Al-Shifa hospital. And the area has been hit by an Israeli bomb just moments ago, in which at least about one person was killed and several others have been injured. Now, this has come as the death toll in Gaza has surpassed the 11,000 mark in a span of a month. And earlier in the day, Israel had confirmed that it will implement what have been described as 4-hour military humanitarian pauses in areas of the northern part of Gaza every day. The provision of daily pauses in fighting, which was first announced by the Americans, will allow for civilians to flee from the embattled region. Pay attention to the word. It is to allow people to flee from their homes. Now, the 4-hour window will be tactical and local pauses in fighting, which will allow for humanitarian aid to reach the people. The first humanitarian pause is, of course, expected today, but so far it has not been announced, and it's already evening. The United States has said that Israel is committed to announcing each 4-hour window at least 3 hours in advance. The pauses are also expected to allow for the potential release of captives that Hamas is currently holding. It will also allow foreign and dual nationals to get out of the Gaza Strip, and the United Nations has said that any humanitarian pauses should be done in coordination with the intergovernmental body to be effective. But critics and analysts have in fact called the US announcement as nothing but a distraction. They say that the discourse around humanitarian pauses is simply meaningless, and it only shows as to have enabled or perhaps how unwilling the Biden administration has been to put pressure on the state of Israel to end this horrific onslaught. Because remember, it is the Americans who are giving the weapons to the Israelis, which are later being dropped on the Palestinians in Gaza. Many people are also saying that the US announcement has fallen short of what is needed by the people of Gaza at this moment. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what, of course, is happening in the Gaza Strip at this moment and what these humanitarian 4-hour pauses actually even mean, by Mr. Omar Barghouti, who's a prominent Palestinian human rights defender and the co-founder of the Boycott, Divest and Sanctions movement. Now, Mr. Barghouti, this is something that was in the works in the aftermath of the hectic diplomatic efforts which the Americans claim that they have carried out, and the Israelis reportedly have agreed for what they describe as 4-hour tactical military pauses. What does it even mean for the people in Gaza?
Well, before I talk about what it means to Palestinians in Gaza, let me cite a very senior former UN official who said, quote, "4-hour pauses between massacres are not humanitarian. They are merely managed ethnic cleansing. Saying to caged victims, go ahead, I'll give you a head start before I come to kill you again, is a cruel and cynical charade," he said, "for which the perpetrators must be held to account." This is a ploy to distract from what's going on the ground. The US-Israeli axis is committing a televised genocide against the Palestinian people, 2.3 million Palestinians in the occupied, besieged Gaza Strip. This is not a matter of opinion. Major human rights organizations, UN experts, Israeli experts on the Holocaust and the studies of genocide have said this is a textbook case of genocide. Professor Raz Segal, a very prominent Israeli Holocaust and genocide studies scholar, said it's a genocide. So there's an attempt by the US and the Israeli propaganda machine to distract from what's happening. The onslaught of killing Palestinians in their homes, hospitals, destruction of universities, bakeries, water reservoirs, solar panels, just destroy hospitals, destroying everything to make life impossible. This is the very definition of genocide, especially that the intent to destroy is very, very clear.
Right.
Israeli leaders, from the prime minister to the war minister to others, openly dehumanize Palestinians, saying we must erase them, eradicate them, treat them like human animals, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely indeed, Mr. Barghouti. Thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us with that perspective there.
Thank you.
The Israeli troops are now in the heart of the Gaza city. An Israeli aerial bombardment and also the ground operations in the besieged Gaza Strip have so far killed over 10,800 Palestinians. And eventually, after many days of negotiations, Israel reportedly has agreed to what are being described as humanitarian pauses. And this is only to allow the besieged Palestinian people to flee from their homes. The American President Joe Biden says that he welcomes these so-called humanitarian pauses. The World Health Organization has said the bombardment of Gaza's biggest hospital, Al-Shifa, is the latest addition to the list of over 20 hospitals in the Gaza Strip that are now currently out of service.
Yes, we're getting reports now that increasing numbers of hospitals are no longer functioning. The information I have at the moment is that there are only, we've got 20 hospitals out of action. And I haven't got the detail on Al-Shifa as yet, but we do know that they are coming under bombardment. And we also know that there was significant bombardment of Rantisi Hospital, which is the only hospital providing pediatric services in North Gaza. And in that hospital were a number of children who were on life support and children receiving dialysis, things that you cannot possibly evacuate them safely with.
The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has said that the Israeli offensive at the Al-Shifa hospital is designed to root out Hamas fighters who are operating from the vicinity. Yoav Gallant claimed that the IDF is using new methods to try and destroy the tunnels underneath the Gaza Strip.
הלוחמים בעזה נמצאים בלב העיר עזה. הם נמצאים בפאתי שתי, הם נמצאים סמוך לבית החולים שיפה, הם נמצאים סמוך מאוד לנמל עזה. אלה שנמצאים, המחבלים, במרתפים שמתחת לשיפה, שומעים הערב היטב את רעם שרשראות הטנקים, את הדחפורים שנוגחים בשטח, הם שומעים מתחת לאדמה, שומעים ורועדים מפחד.
Now, the Israeli Defense Forces have also released a video that claims to give more evidence about the misuse of hospitals in the Gaza Strip, where thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians have taken refuge. Now, in this video, one of the captured Hamas fighters talks about how the Al-Shifa hospital had been used by the resistance forces.
شبكة كبيرة مش صغيرة الشبكة تبعها في بتخبوا في شيفا المسائل هذه اللي بيقعدوا في شيفا منهم من حسب رأيك؟ الكبار زي الصنواع زي هذول كلهم بيقعدوا هناك هذول الكبيرة السياسية والعسكرية كلهم بيقعدوا هناك وشو كمان بناخذوا
All right, now that was a video that was released by the Israelis with the captured Hamas fighters there. Meanwhile, a huge cloud of smoke was seen rising over the northern part of Gaza Strip because of the Israeli bombardments. Now, Israeli air bombings have targeted infrastructure, and this is what the scene looks like in one of the most densely populated cities anywhere in the world. Now, Israeli forces have tightened security for the Friday prayers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. The worshippers, of course, gather there to offer their afternoon prayers every Friday. Meanwhile, Israel has finally now agreed to 4 hours of military pauses in the northern part of Gaza. The American National Security spokesperson John Kirby said that there will be 2 humanitarian corridors for people who want to flee from the northern part of Gaza because of the Israeli bombardments. Now, the agreement was later detailed by the State Department. Turkey has sent a ship loaded with some field hospital equipment, ambulances and generators to Egypt. The ship, carrying nearly about 51 containers of medical supplies, generators and 20 ambulances, is expected to arrive at Egypt's Al Arish port by the 11th of November. Now, as we speak at this moment, more than 10,800 people in the Palestinian occupied territories have been killed in this campaign of relentless bombing of the Gaza Strip. An estimated 20,000 plus people have been very grievously injured. 1 million people have been displaced from their homes. 1/3 of the region has been turned into virtual flat rubble land. The thousands, of course, are fleeing with nothing more than the clothes on their back. They're walking with their young children along with the elderly people, and those who are lucky can rent some of these carts, which are now taking people away from the areas that are experiencing relentless bombardment by the Israelis. And many people are saying that this is, of course, bringing back horrific memories of the Nakba. And our correspondent Susan Tehrani has been tracking the story very closely for us and has briefed about Israel's tactical humanitarian pauses. Listen.
Facing mounting pressure from his own party here at home and allies abroad, U.S. President Joe Biden seems to have convinced Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to agree for a short-term temporary humanitarian pause for Israel's operations in Gaza. This, as we also learned on Thursday, that CIA and Mossad officials met with Qatari officials in Doha about the possibility to release some hostages from Hamas captivity. More than 1 or 2. The number was around 10 to 30. We'll have to see how that develops. But Israel, on the one hand, is concerned that any pause or even talk of a ceasefire would play into Hamas's hands. It also understands that that window of opportunity for support for Israel's operations in Gaza is growing smaller and smaller. And the longer this operation takes, the less support Israel may have, not among its own public, but from the international community, notably, once again, Democrats here in the United States as well. For the Biden administration, how successful this balancing act that it's trying to carry out will be ultimately is something that we'll have to wait and see. Susan Tehrani reporting from New York for WION World is One.
The death toll is rising as the fighting intensifies between Israeli forces and Hamas militant near and around hospitals. Israel is now facing mounting international pressure, including from its main ally, the United States, to do more to protect Palestinian civilians in Gaza. In what appeared to be a series of Israeli military airstrikes in the Palestinian territory, a series of explosions lit up the night sky over the Gaza Strip. And the Hamas-run Gaza Health Services say more than 11,000 Palestinians have been killed since the fighting began. Now, according to Hamas Health Ministry, at least 3 strikes over several hours hit the courtyard and the obstetrics department of Shifa hospital, killing several and wounding others sheltering there. Chaotic scenes were seen outside the hospital as many were attempting to flee. Israel's military said that a misfired projectile launched by militant groups in Gaza had hit Shifa hospital. It further dismissed reports that said that the blast was caused by an Israeli airstrike. In another attack by Israeli forces, 1 person was killed and 28 others were wounded in a shooting by Israeli forces at Al-Quds hospital in Gaza. Medical teams in Gaza City's Al-Quds hospital worked under torchlight to treat the patients. And on the other hand, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu visited an army base at the border with Gaza. Netanyahu spoke with soldiers and joined them for Sabbath service. He praised the soldiers for their job to security of Israel. Meanwhile, evacuations from the Gaza Strip into Egypt for foreign passport holders and for Palestinians needing urgent medical treatment were suspended due to problems bringing medical evacuees to the Rafah border crossing from inside Gaza. And this comes as Israel's chief military spokesperson, Rear Admiral, said that more than 100,000 residents of the Gaza Strip have fled southwards over the last 2 days as Israeli forces operate deep in the Gaza city. The Israeli military released video, it says, showed airstrikes on a series of Hezbollah targets in Lebanese territory, and the attacks also included military positions where the group was believed to have been operating, a weapons warehouse and an intelligence site. In an interview with BBC, French President Emmanuel Macron said that while he recognizes Israel's right to protect itself, there was no justification for the bombing, saying a ceasefire would benefit Israel. On the other hand, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas said that the Palestinian Authority could play a role in administering the Gaza Strip on condition that there was a full political solution that also encompassed the occupied West Bank. Amnesty International Secretary has called out the Western Bloc's double standards when it comes to international conflicts that are a threat to human rights. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called for an end to the war in Gaza during an African-Saudi summit held in the kingdom's capital, Riyadh.
وأن ندين ما يشهده قطاع غزة من اعتداء عسكري واستهداف المدنيين واستمرار انتهاكات سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلية للقانون الدولي الإنساني لنؤكد ضرورة وقف هذه الحرب والتهجير القسري وتهيئة الظروف لعودة الاستقرار وتحقيق السلام في أفريقيا، وذلك عبر تدشين مشروعات وبرامج مائية في دول القارة بقيمة تتجاوز $1 مليار على مدى 10 سنوات.
The United States expressed growing concern about the rising Palestinian deaths. We begin with Israel-Hamas war and the latest that's come in, and as the fighting continues to rage between Israeli forces and Hamas militants near and around Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, as the humanitarian situation worsens, Israel military said that it was ready to evacuate babies from the hospital. Now, it's the same hospital where Palestinian officials said that 2 newborns died and dozens more were at risk after fuel ran out amid intense fighting in that area. Israeli military has said that hospital staff had requested assistance to transfer babies to a safer hospital.
The east side of the hospital is open on El Wade Street for the safe pass of Gazans who wish to leave the hospital. We're speaking directly and regularly with the hospital staff. The staff of the Shifa hospital has requested that tomorrow we will help the babies in the pediatric department to get to a safer hospital. We will provide the assistance needed.
The Israeli military released videos showing the continued ground operation inside Gaza Strip, where its military tanks were firing at targets believed to be Hamas infrastructure. And during the operation, the military said that a number of weapons were found in a kindergarten. They also said that they've also destroyed dozens of tunnel openings. And this comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his aim for Israel would take control of security in Gaza for an indefinite period. He added that Israel wanted to be able to re-enter the Strip whenever necessary. And amid the continued fighting, Hamas said it had completely or partially destroyed more than 160 Israeli military targets at Gaza, including more than 25 vehicles in the past 48 hours. However, an Israeli military spokesperson said that Hamas lost control of northern Gaza. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's chief Hassan Nasrallah said that the group was using the new weapons in its attacks against Israel. On the other hand, several people were reportedly killed and others were injured in an Israeli airstrike that targeted the city of Rafah in Gaza. And this comes as Gaza's border authority said that the Rafah crossing into Egypt would reopen on Sunday for foreign passport holders after closing on Friday. Egyptian sources said that the border would begin operating at 9 a.m. local time for foreigners and medical evacuees. India was among the 145 nations that voted in favor of the United Nations resolution that condemned settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. The UN draft resolution titled Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan, was passed by overwhelming majority. According to Israeli media, there was some progress towards a deal to free hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, and this is according to reports that Israel would release women and minor Palestinian prisoners from its jails and consider letting fuel into Gaza. We begin with Israel-Hamas war and the latest that's come in, and as the fighting continues to rage between Israeli forces and Hamas militants near and around Gaza's largest hospital, Al-Shifa, as the humanitarian situation worsens, Israel military said that it was ready to evacuate babies from the hospital. Now, it's the same hospital where Palestinian officials said that 2 newborns died and dozens more were at risk after fuel ran out amid intense fighting in that area. Israeli military has said that hospital staff had requested assistance to transfer babies to a safer hospital.
The east side of the hospital is open on El Wade Street for the safe pass of Gazans who wish to leave the hospital. We're speaking directly and regularly with the hospital staff. The staff of the Shifa hospital has requested that tomorrow we will help the babies in the pediatric department to get to a safer hospital. We will provide the assistance needed.
The Israeli military released videos showing the continued ground operation inside Gaza Strip, where its military tanks were firing at targets believed to be Hamas infrastructure. And during the operation, the military said that a number of weapons were found in a kindergarten. They also said that they have also destroyed dozens of tunnel openings. And this comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that his aim for Israel would take control of security in Gaza for an indefinite period. He added that Israel wanted to be able to re-enter the Strip whenever necessary. And amid the continued fighting, Hamas said it had completely or partially destroyed more than 160 Israeli military targets at Gaza, including more than 25 vehicles in the past 48 hours. However, an Israeli military spokesperson said that Hamas lost control of northern Gaza. Meanwhile, Hezbollah's chief Hassan Nasrallah said that the group was using the new weapons in its attacks against Israel. On the other hand, several people were reportedly killed and others were injured in an Israeli airstrike that targeted the city of Rafah in Gaza. And this comes as Gaza's border authority said that the Rafah crossing into Egypt would reopen on Sunday for foreign passport holders after closing on Friday. Egyptian sources said that the border would begin operating at 9 a.m. local time for foreigners and medical evacuees. India was among the 145 nations that voted in favor of the United Nations resolution that condemned settlement activities in the occupied Palestinian territory. The UN draft resolution titled Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory, including East Jerusalem and the occupied Syrian Golan, was passed by overwhelming majority. According to Israeli media, there was some progress towards a deal to free hostages held by Hamas in Gaza, and this is according to reports that Israel would release women and minor Palestinian prisoners from its jails and consider letting fuel into Gaza.
As the war in Gaza continues and Israel insists it is pursuing the Hamas militant group, concerns are rising over the situation in the region. Hezbollah leader Nasrallah has said the United States is the only country that can stop the escalating conflict in West Asia, as it is, quote-unquote, managing this aggression. Nasrallah's comments come as tensions continue to rise along Lebanon's border with Israel, sparking fears of a regional spillover. Nasrallah has blamed the United States for the instability in West Asia. This is Nasrallah's second speech since the war broke out on October 7th.
الذي يستطيع أن يمنع أن يوقف هذا العدوان هو من يدير هذا العدوان، وهو أمريكا هي التي تستطيع أن توقف هذا العدوان.
Earlier, Nasrallah said that the militia is not deterred by U.S. warnings to stay out of the Israel-Hamas war. In a televised speech, Nasrallah says that the fighting on the Lebanon-Israel border would not be limited. Meanwhile, Israel Defense Forces fighter jets have struck a series of Hezbollah infrastructure and military posts in Lebanon. Earlier today, a Hezbollah militant cell had launched several rockets from Lebanon towards northern Israel. In response, an IDF aircraft struck the militant cell and launch pad. The Israel-Hamas war inches closer to an inevitable milestone, the exodus of Palestinians. It has happened before and it is now happening again. While Israelis chant the slogan, "Never again," Gazans find themselves amidst another bout of migration yet again. Thousands of Gazans have begun to move southwards of Gaza City as Israeli tanks roll deeper into the enclave. Palestinians, including children and disabled people, are walking towards Khan Yunis on foot. They are carrying their belongings in bags and with bedding across their backs, as you can see there, and are using carts pulled by horses and donkeys carrying the injured. Gazans who had been sheltering in the Shifa hospital are also traveling towards the south by foot after the Israeli Defense Forces struck it overnight. But it is the first time that this is happening. Actually, it's not the first time that this is happening. That was a question. There have been 3 major bouts of displacements in Gaza's history. The first ever was during Nakba in 1948. This is what is called the Great Catastrophe. 700,000 Palestinians were displaced from their homeland during the Six-Day War in 1967. Between 280,000 and 325,000 Palestinians were displaced. Then the 1973 war, which was called the Yom Kippur War, displaced around 160 to 190,000 Palestinians. And as of today, the Israel-Hamas war has rendered over 1 million Palestinians homeless in the Gaza Strip, without a home. This is this year. Wars not only change the cause of people, but also the nation as well. The map of Israel dynamically changed over the course of decades and several wars. Here's how the space for Palestinians continued to shrink over the years. In 1947, the United Nations proposed partitioning Palestine into 2 states, one Jewish and the other Arab. The Jerusalem-Bethlehem area was to become an international city. The plan was accepted by Palestine's Jewish leadership, but rejected by Arab leaders. In 1948, it witnessed the Nakba, and the following war ended in 1949 with a ceasefire and an amnesties line. Gaza Strip and the West Bank came into existence in this year. The biggest change to Israel's frontiers came in 1967. The Six-Day War left Israel in occupation of the Sinai Peninsula, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and most of the Syrian Golan Heights. Now, this tripled the size of territory under Israel's control, but Israel's borders got formalized only in 1979, when it was
first recognized by Egypt under a peace treaty. Under this, Israel withdrew all its forces and settlers from the Sinai. The process was completed in 1982. But every change in the shape of maps witnessed a war, and wars always claim the lives of the innocent on both sides. Both Israel and the Gaza Strip are losing people on either side of the border. But while the Israeli Defense Forces mount their offensive, Gazans find themselves lost and are fending for themselves amidst an ever-intensifying humanitarian crisis. This is the long walk of Palestinians in Gaza, as you can see there, a walk with no destination at all. Let's just look at these visuals for a moment.
All right, so let's start with the big story that we are tracking on WION. These are the Arab and the Muslim leaders have gathered in Saudi Arabia for what has been dubbed as an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit in an attempt to exert their influence to try and press the United States and the State of Israel to bring an immediate end to the bombings on the Gaza Strip. The leaders, including the Iranian president, have issued a strong statement. They've condemned Israel's relentless bombardment of the Gaza enclave. The Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has called on the Arab and the Islamic world leaders to designate the Israeli military as a terrorist organization. In his first visit to Riyadh since Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore their ties in the month of March, Ibrahim Raisi urged the Muslim nations that have ties with Israel to sever them and has called for greater support for the Palestinian people. The Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has also called on for support from the Islamic nations, saying that Gaza is not an arena for words. The time has now come for action, and the action to be to immediately to cease fire on the innocent, hapless Palestinian civilians who are getting killed in their thousands.
این میدان دیگه میدان سخن تنها نیست که فقط سخن و اعلام موضع بشه. باید میدان عمل باشه و اقدام.
And echoing what the Iranian president has stated, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad also called for the countries to stop the normalization talks with the state of Israel.
هي أن الكيان ازداد إيقاف أي مسار سياسي مع الكيان الصهيوني بكل ما يشمله المسار السياسي من عناوين اقتصادية أو غيرها، لتكون عودته مشروطة بالتزام الكيان بالوقف الفوري المديد لا المؤقت للإجرام بحق كل الفلسطينيين في كل فلسطين، مع السماح بإدخال المساعدات الفورية إلى غزة. أما الحديث عن الدولتين وإطلاق عملية السلام وغيرها من التفاصيل والحقوق.
The Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has denounced attacks on the Gaza Strip. He's also reiterated his stance during the Riyadh summit, calling for an immediate end to the violence in the Gaza Strip.
الرحمن الرحيم، أصحاب الفخامة كامل، ومن هذا المنطلق يسرنا أن نعلن عن إطلاق مبادرة خادم الحرمين الشريفين، وأن ندين ما يشهده قطاع غزة من اعتداء عسكري واستهداف المدنيين واستمرار انتهاكات سلطة الاحتلال الإسرائيلية للقانون الدولي الإنساني، لنؤكد ضرورة وقف هذه الحرب والتهجير القسري وتهيئة الظروف لعودة الاستقرار وتحقيق السلام في أفريقيا، وذلك عبر تدشين مشروعات وبرامج مائية في دول القارة بقيمة تتجاوز $1 مليار على مدى 10 سنوات.
The joint meeting has been convened in response to the exceptional circumstances taking place in the Gaza Strip. Earlier, 2 separate meetings were in fact scheduled over the weekend, one of the Arab League and one of the OIC members, but now it has been combined. Now, the Arab nations are divided about normalizing their ties with Israel, and They've been condemning the humanitarian crisis that is happening at this moment due to the relentless campaign of bombings that Israel has resorted on the Gaza Strip. According to reports, the Arab foreign ministers who held an emergency meeting on Thursday were divided as some countries led by Algeria were calling their other Arab nation partners to cut off all diplomatic ties with the State of Israel.
المملكة من قدمت هذه المبادرة وسعت أيضا المملكة العربية.
In the Arab world, we're being joined by Professor Asif Ramiz Dodi. Now, Professor Dodi is a foreign policy and a Middle East expert. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Now, Professor, we've been looking at what has been happening in the Gaza Strip for the last month, and the Arab leaders have been calling for an immediate ceasefire. And there was this extraordinary summit that's been held where the leaders of the Arab world and the Muslim nations have come together and they're calling for a ceasefire. But have the Arab nations done enough?
Well, Saleh, thank you for having me on your show. What is happening there is quite unfortunate. The world doesn't need a war. We have seen what's been happening there in Russia and Ukraine. So this is the biggest concern, one of the biggest concerns of the world, and especially for those countries who are going to be badly affected because of this. And in this extraordinary meeting, when we talk about, the Gaza Strip and what's happening there, I was just, trying to understand what you were saying in your introductory remarks. The first word was the hospitals. The hospitals are under attack, etc. I was going through one of very emotional remarks and messages yesterday, and I would like to quote it here. They say that in Palestine, their brothers and friends smell like hospitals, and the hospitals smell like graveyards, and graveyards smell like their brothers and relatives, and that is Palestine. When we have situation of this gravity, I mean, something where the world should realize the effect and impact if it is not controlled at the right time. That's the purpose, I think, those countries, especially in this region, they are trying to bring peace. They are trying to have some sort of peaceful resolution. Let me just interject there. The question that I want you to, in fact, talk a bit about is, have these Arab nations used their leverage that they have to try and, to put some amount of pressure, if they can, on the United States and Israel for a ceasefire? Have the Arab nations made all the right noises, but have they acted on those noises that they are making? Yeah, I think I have to agree with your question. When we see that it's not going to stop, we live in a world where we have rule-based system. We have international laws. Even wars have laws. So if it's not going to stop somewhere, they have to take the leverage, they have to show the unity, they have to come to the conclusion or some sort of, a decision where the ceasefire or the immediate kind of ceasefire is initiated. And that pressure, diplomatic pressure, or some sort of, whatever pressure that one can create, it's needed. And this is one of those tactics, because we know one of the ministers in Israel mentioned about the nuclear attacks. I mean, see where the world is going. So if they do not follow the international laws, if we do not care about the innocent lives, around 4,000 children are being, killed. I mean, that's something. So this is something these Arab nations and those countries, especially, it's not only Arab nations.
Professor Dodi, that brings me to my next question. The United States has been pushing for the normalization of ties of these Arab nations with the State of Israel under the Abraham Accords. But because of this war, are we to now say that the Abraham Accords and the normalization of ties between the Arab nations and Israel has now been put into cold storage?
Yeah, I think I agree with you. And, these Arab nations, especially some of those progressive nations, they have vision, and they just tried to have some diversified, kind of vibrant kind of society. And considering that they started having some sort of diplomatic ties and some sort of connections and positive approach to bring peace and prosperity in the region. And now if we see these kinds of developments, I think when you talk about Abraham Accord, when you talk about having the diplomatic ties, etc., it's going to be in the cold storage, as you said.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, Professor, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Thank you.
Now, Arab and Muslim leaders gathered in Saudi Arabia for an extraordinary joint Islamic-Arab summit in an attempt to exert its influence to press the United States and Israel to bring an immediate end to the bombings which have resulted in such horrific suffering for the people in the Gaza Strip. The Iranian president was also present, and he has strongly condemned the Israeli bombardment of the Gazan enclave. In the latest, the Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has called on the Arab and the Islamic world leaders to designate Israel's military as a terrorist organization. In his very first visit to Riyadh since Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to restore their ties in the month of March, Ibrahim Raisi has urged nations that have ties with Israel to sever them and has called for greater support for the Palestinian people. The Iranian President Ibrahim has called for support from the Islamic nations, saying that Gaza is not an arena for words. It is time for nations to in fact act and bring about a concrete resolution to the bombings that are presently underway in the Gaza Strip.
میدان دیگه میدان سخن تنها نیست که فقط سخن و اعلام موضع بشه. باید میدان عمل باشه و اقدام.
Now, echoing what the Iranian president said, the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad has called for countries to stop normalization talks with Israel.
هي أن الكيان ازداد إيقاف أي مسار سياسي مع الكيان الصهيوني بكل ما يشمله المسار السياسي من عناوين اقتصادية أو غيرها.